thank you all for joining. I'm going to go ahead and get us started. So thanks again for joining. Um, Today, our subject, and this is going to be a three-part series. So it was originally going to be a one-part series, and then there was a lot I wanted to share with all of you. And then it became a two-part series. And then a couple days ago, as I was working on it, and I didn't want to cut anything out because I thought I really wanted to make this actionable and non-theoretical. So got some concrete examples. So I asked Maggie if she would be so kind, and we were going to build this into a three-part series now. So hope that that's good for everybody. So this is part one of three, and we'll be doing these across the next couple of months. So one per month for the three-part series. So anyway, with that, we'll go ahead and get started and kickstarting your Agile VMO with generative AI. Today, and this is the agenda really for all of these three parts. So today we'll talk a little bit about why generative AI and the VMO, talk about preparing proper prompts. And yes, I for whatever reason I have to do build back better, building better backlogs, preparing proper prompts. For whatever reason, I think alliterative is helpful for me there. But we'll talk about good prompts, not just for our VMO using generative AI, but as a principle and practice that many of you already know is essential for getting useful, valuable information out of any generative AI tool. We'll talk about the VMO launch and what a 90-day plan could look like. Now, it's not prescriptive unless you want it to be, but I'm going to talk. I'm going to talk through some of the things that I think we should do in the first 90 days and how generative AI with specificity can help there. In today's session, we're going to get through phase one, the first 30 days. And then in the subsequent sessions, we'll talk about the following middle 30 days. I'm sorry, the next 30 days. So that middle period. And then the third one for the final 30 days, we'll also have some caveats and caution. So I always say when I talk about generative AI to audiences like this, my goal really is to get you super excited about how useful these tools are and to get you really wanting to use them, and then to just kill that vibe and just be like, oh, joking aside though, when we use these tools, like any powerful tool, if they're used the wrong way, bad things can happen. So I'll talk about that. And then some concrete things in summary to move forward. As those of you who've been in some of these sessions with me before know, there's a lot of great wisdom on AI in general and really agile ways of working out there. There's a lot of great content. For me, I really like things that help me tactically, but on a strategic lens, get kickstarted. So this is something that I would love to have, and I hope that some of you find this useful in a non-theoretical way. If you want to get started, if you're having a challenge with launching your VMO or transitioning from a legacy PMO, I'm hopeful that some of this will help you sort of clear that blocker and move forward. That's my goal. So with that, this is me. If you're not connected with me on LinkedIn and you'd like to be for whatever reason, there's a QR code here. I'm proud and honored to be the VP of Consulting here at LitheSpeed, but really I'm a speaker and an educator and a consultant. Getting dangerously close to 30 years in technology roles. From that though, I spent around 6 years with a AI and natural language processing organization. And so have a lot of experience informed by that. It wasn't generative AI, but a lot of these principles really still do apply. So I was just, that has really informed a lot of the ways that I think about how we thoughtfully use AI. I've also been developing and delivering a number of courses on AI, specifically these days around generative AI. And it is something that is part of the work that I do every single day. I use these tools for real world tasks. Trying to really get past both the hype and the fear. These are tools, and if they're used thoughtfully, like we'll talk about today and in this three-part series, I think they'll really help with some of the things if you're having some challenges with establishing or growing or maintaining your VMO. So from there, if I could implore all of you, could you point your phones at this QR code if you're willing? It's anonymous. Where are you on your journey in implementing or transitioning to your Agile Value Management Office? All right, we've got one respondent so far. We have at least two. Cool. All right, we're getting there. There we go. So I always say when I do a poll like this, I never know what the answers will be, which is kind of fun for me to be ready to respond whatever it is, like improvisational jazz. But this sort of stacks up the way that I would have expected. So haven't started yet, but want to. And then the next is started with some challenges. And those are the highest population, well, tied with just curious here to learn. And for those of you who are established and want to improve or expand or going well, but continuously improving, that's wonderful. And maybe in subsequent sessions or when we do Q&A, you may have some wisdom to impart from your experience as well. But the data here, this 42%, and really with some of that 17%, that's really what I wanted to focus on is for those of us that want to get started, but are just having some challenges with how do we get started or starting effectively. That's what today in this three-part series is about. So thank you all for jumping in and your responses, and I'll just jump right in from here. So getting started with generative AI in your Agile Value Management Office. So some of you may know that I use this owl picture whenever I can when there's a question. But this is a good question. Why would we use generative AI to launch our VMO? And this is based on my personal experience in launching VMOs or similar, APMOs. It's hard work. It's absolutely worth it. It really gives us the outcomes that we need in organizations. Hard stop, that is just absolutely true. The VMO can change that reality. But the change requires extensive experience in what I would say are disparate areas. The first, agile and lean ways of working. Well, all of us here are proponents of that, or at least most of us. So that may be something that we're able to do. How about team, product, initiative, and portfolio level planning and operational processes? So we've got some challenges there. Not everyone, at least at the portfolio level, is going to be able to understand. You may know how to do it at a team level or at a product or a project level. But when you start looking at the entirety of the portfolio, that sometimes is a different skill set and a different role in many major organizations or enterprises. A lot of organizations, from my first-hand experience in senior leadership roles as well as consulting, there is not a lot of great use of metrics and reporting in a lot of organizations. There's often a lot of reports, but they're not generally acted upon. They're not always outcome-based metrics. There's a whole bunch of other caveats there. And to do this well, to launch a VMO, if we're talking about outcomes, which is a key element of the VMO, metrics and reporting are going to be key, and we're going to need to have experts there. Significant changes to budgetary and funding models. Probably the biggest challenge that I've seen in the real world for large organizations moving towards these models is, working with the organization and enterprise to change the funding mechanism when moving away from project-based funding to product-based funding or fixed funding based on value streams. Staffing or training for newer change roles. Most of these VMOs are transitioning from traditional PMOs. There's new roles that didn't exist before. So there's a requirement to change those roles and understand organizational structure. Moving towards that outcome and value-based focus. And then organizational change management. So as I go through this list, each of these are formal disciplines. And to roll this out, we need those areas of expertise and a depth of expertise to roll out our VMO. Few organizations, at least from my experience, have all of those necessary skill sets and those individuals who have that experience and expertise, and that they've done these things before, similar to this type of work. But even when they do, well, those people are already in demand. They have day jobs, but these, if you think about what those areas are, these are some of the biggest, most important things that most organizations do. So even if you have all of these skill sets, it's not like those folks are already idle. And that's the point of this three-part series, that generative AI tools can help us in all of these areas so that we can get past those blockers where we don't have that skill set and we don't have people we can lean on for all of that. Generative AI can help us. So AI is in the news ad nauseum. I don't know what your LinkedIn feed looks like. Mine, by choice in part, is heavily weighted towards machine learning, AI in general, generative AI in particular. But I like to true back to connecting AI and the agile mindset. And again, connecting those two, I think, is really important. Those of you who are here in these sessions, with really expert agile backgrounds, I've seen in our community there's some different thoughts in terms of how AI is going to impact us. From my perspective, AI, like money, is fungible. It can be used for good things or bad things. AI, same way. It's not inherently good or bad. It depends on how you use it. I think from an agile mindset perspective, as we talk in this series about how we leverage AI for our VMO, it helps us with, AI in general helps us embrace change and uncertainty to be more collaborative. And in these examples, adapting our practices so that we can use AI as that co-pilot. I know that term is overused, but to help us do the work that we do, especially when there is substantial amounts of change and uncertainty. And the VMO is going to be one of those transformational changes where there is change and uncertainty. The idea of continuous learning and improvement. So it's going to be hard, again, to keep up to speed with a lot of the principles, practices, etc., with rolling out a VMO, especially if you're part of a fairly small team. It can help us keeping up to date with the things that really matter with a level of specificity and precision that you'll see in some of my examples, so that we can continue to roll out and expand and grow and improve our VMO. And then this customer-centric focus in everything that we do, if we can help roll out our VMO solution and start changing the reality of delivering value more quickly and effectively and looking at an outcome-based approach, this really helps accelerate this principle of a customer-centric focus. So that's why I think it's an enabler in the best sense of that word, using AI not to replace people, but to help us augment, automate, improve, accelerate all of the things that we're doing in this very large, valuable effort. So one of the things that I had mentioned, again, this is not specific to the VMO, but it's essential to any effective use of generative AI. It doesn't matter what tool you use, choose whichever one you'd like. For our examples, by the way, I'll talk about the specific custom GPT that LitheSpeed has built. Sanjeev, our president, built a custom GPT specifically for the VMO, and those will be our examples. But whatever tool you use, the guidance on how to create good prompts is absolutely essential for rolling out your VMO and the examples I'll show you, but just for everything else as well. So these practices really do very much apply. The first is this principle of garbage in, garbage out. Like any other technology that you have an expectation on what you're going to receive from it, it's going to require high quality input to get high quality output. So if you're very vague and generic in your prompts, your inputs to these AIs, it's going to give you a very generic response based on, again, probability. It may seem like it's a human through anthropomorphization, but it's probability. So the more vague you are, the more you're going to get is what's the most statistically likely thing for that general idea. The more specific you are, the more accurate and specific response you're going to be receiving. Maximize the AI's potential. These well-crafted prompts can help you really get more accurate, relevant, and useful results. And I'll give you some real-world examples in the remainder of this session and the other two. Also for consistency and reliability, and this is one of the areas where I think we all know generative AI still continues to struggle, especially for those of us with computer science and software development backgrounds. We expect with the same input, we're going to get a predictable output. That doesn't happen, and that's by design in these systems, in these tools, but we can get more consistency and reliability in our responses if we are preparing more detailed and thoughtful prompts. Mitigating bias and errors. So across the board, again, if we're general, we're going to get whatever is the most probabilistic answer. And the more general that is, you're going to get a lot of what I think dross is the right word. I'm not sure what the right word is, with specificity about low quality data that's available on the ubiquitous internet. But we do not want to perpetuate any of the bias or bad information that exists on the public internet and the data that builds these models. The more specific we are, the more that we can ensure that we are at least mitigating the likelihood of bias and errors in our responses. Still want to be thoughtful about that. It's a really big problem with these tools, but let's do what we can to mitigate that in advance. And then provide context. And that word's going to keep coming up over and over and over again, especially as we roll out the VMO. Maybe some of the struggles that some of you had pointed to in terms of the ability to roll it out or slowing it down or not even getting started is that your organizational context has some challenges, staffing, culture, politics, money, whatever that might be. The more specific you are about current state, the more that the answers can be helpful in terms of actions you can take based on that current state. So this really, we want to focus on preparing proper prompts. Plus, it's fun to say. So some initial suggestions, and again, you'll see these in my examples, but some initial suggestions on generative AI prompting. And again, these are, at least for the moment, immutable. I think maybe those two phrases don't go together, but they do in this particular moment. To get the best outputs, provide those good inputs. So the first is to think about role. So what is the role or the role you wish to emulate? So I am an Agile and Lean educator and speaker, or I am a Scrum Master, or I am a PMO director moving towards Agile ways. And whatever that is, the more specific that you are in the role in your prompt, the more specifically targeted those responses are going to be to you. The next is the audience. So if you're generating something on behalf of an audience, who is that audience? I think, specifically like for the VMO, and we'll talk about stakeholder management and engagement, but if I'm crafting an email or communication to executives, the exact same content foundation for that email could be materially different, should be materially different than if I'm sending it to a technical expert, an architect, or to a project manager or others. So we also want to be specific about the audience if we're using it to generate things that are audience specific. Context, again, wherever you are in your organizational journey, team journey for these prompts, the more detail you provide, the more accurate or likely accurate and helpful information you're going to get. Format. So in the early days of using some of these tools, I would get responses, and then I would put them into Excel and I would parse them and realize sort of embarrassingly that I could just tell it the format I wanted and get a CSV and then put it into Excel. It's a lot easier than copying and pasting. So if you have expectations or needs, if you're feeding a mailing list because you're going to send out a communication or whatever the case might be, specify the proper results. It'll save you a lot of time. And then length, in some cases, you want to be very brief. And if you're not specific, sometimes I've wanted an executive summary to be generated from a lot of information, and I get a 10-page executive summary. At that point, it's not really an executive summary. So be specific with some of those constraints, and you're likely to get something that you have to edit or modify less. So again, these are applicable to what I'm going to show you today, but they're also applicable for any use of generative AI. So for the remainder of our time today, and we'll have some time for Q&A, feel free, as Maggie said, to throw any questions or comments you have in the chat. I'll look at those periodically if they're urgent. Maggie will, I'm sure, let me know. So thank you in advance. My co-pilot, by the way, not generative AI, it's real Maggie, but we're working together on this. So thank you for your help. First 30 days, and again, jump in with any questions as you wish or thoughts. But the first 30 days, the things that we want to do, if we're thinking about a 90-day plan from start to launch for our VMO, the first 30 days, let's break that up into 30, 60, 90. So the first 30 days, these are some things that we would suggest. The first is stakeholder engagement. So if we want to engage stakeholders as part of rolling out our VMO, we can use generative AI to look at stakeholder influence. And then again, like I just mentioned, to target role-specific, even individual-specific communications for the greatest impact in that engagement. And that really can be key. We don't want to send a blast email to executives, and everybody on the team that's exactly the same in many cases. We want a different communication depending on the audience. The next is to define vision and objectives. So if we're going to roll out a VMO, we really want to have a well-crafted and not generic vision, and then objectives. So from that, what are the objectives? And again, we don't want generic objectives. We want organizational specific objectives for our VMO. Why are we launching this? What are the outcomes that we want? And then from there, once we've defined those concrete specific objectives, we can also use the tool for helping us define some initial objectives and key results, which is really key to rolling out our VMO and really any sort of material goal setting. Initiate value stream mapping. So it can't do all of the work for you, but these tools can be very helpful to do analysis of your current data, and then to look for bottlenecks in current processes, and then also provide some suggestions on things that could be done to at least get you started with solving those problems. It often will provide suggestions that aren't necessarily going to be appropriate, but what I found is that in maybe 10 responses, maybe half of those, sometimes more, sometimes less, there will be things that I can do there, at least as a starting point, not as an ending point, but it gives me something to work with, and it saves me a lot of time and focus. And then the last is to select tools. So if we want to roll out our VMO, a core part of that is being able to do lean portfolio management, to really look at our portfolio. And since we're really looking at a product-based model rather than project-based, how can we really look from a product perspective more thoughtfully with our tooling? So maybe some of you already know how to do that, have tools today, but for those who don't, that can be an overwhelming place to start, especially because all organizations are going to have some tooling to support these functions. So can I use the current tool? Do I need to move to something else? Those are the sorts of things that generative AI can be very helpful in helping that process. So the first in the first 30 days is to engage those stakeholders. So again, provide detailed context, the more the better. You can see from my prompt here, and this is a very, very long prompt, but it gives us a lot of really good specific guidance. So again, I put my role here. You're an expert in lean portfolio management, blah, 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 etc. I'm very specific. Help me design a stakeholder engagement and management strategy for the first 30 days. So again, there's specificity there. And I've also provided that it's a regional credit union on the West Coast. And that data, in your context, you may even want to be more specific. But for my example, I wanted to show that providing information about like being a regional credit union helps inform the response. So that's my context of who I am and what I'm looking for. Give me a step-by-step plan. I ask for very specific information, the desired output. And so here is the entirety of produce superior results. Karen, I will get to that in just a moment, or at least I will try. I will talk about tools as the fourth option here, but thank you for that question. So in this, you can see I've got a very deep and detailed prompt. And then at the bottom, again, your response should balance thought leadership with actionable guidance and reference best practices from PMO to VMO, and the GAO, Agile Guide for Federal Implementations where appropriate. We've got a very detailed prompt. What I did want to say in full transparency, but this is also really helpful and a little bit meta, and I don't mean Facebook meta. I started with a much simpler version of this prompt, and I didn't like what I got. So I asked the tool to give me better prompts. So I actually prompted it for help with prompts, and I got some really good detailed prompts. So iterate through that as well. If you're not getting the quality or detail in your responses, as meta as it may sound, ask it to help you with your prompt so that you can get better outputs from it. So here's what I got with that newly refined and improved prompt. My 30-day stakeholder engagement and management strategy for Agile VMO launch for a regional credit union. I didn't tell it the industry, I didn't tell it the culture, and I didn't tell it the drivers. It was able to use the information that it knows as far as what credit unions do and are and their purpose to understand some things about the industry. Obviously, that's easy, but culture, that's a bit of a connection, and I like it. And then drivers, those make sense for a regulated industry that has competitors who have a lot more resources behind it. Those are things that really matter for a regional credit union. That was part of the reason for the example is it is targeted based on that specific context. It's giving me targeted answers that would be appropriate for me. If I just said, give me guidance for rolling out a plan, that doesn't show any difference between a 5-person startup, and a 10,000 person financial services organization that is subject to HIPAA, PCI, GDPR, et cetera, et cetera. Those things are going to make a big difference in terms of how we communicate and how we roll out our VMO. So you can see down at the bottom, it's provided a table for me with, and again, don't just copy paste. That's one of the caveats that we'll talk about in the last session. You want to check this data because some of it is likely to be, at least in your context, not accurate. In some cases, it's going to come up with things, again, based on probability that are not accurate for you, and in some cases just aren't accurate. So you want to check this work. But at first blush, when I look at this, having done this before, I like the influence of executive leadership is high. Whether their interest is medium or not, I don't know. And organizationally, I didn't tell them if the lean agile alignment was medium, high, or low. So those would be the sorts of things that you might have to override. But I think that if you look at this in the aggregate, this is a really good starting point. Whether it's 60% of the way there or 95 really depends, but it's a lot more than zero. And that's what we're talking about here, is that it can help you clear those log jams and get started again. It's not going to solve all of this for you completely independently. So in response to, again, my very detailed prompt with many embedded sort of cascading requests, in that same response, I just screen capped these for easier reading, but it was one long response. I had my stakeholder identification, item 1, and then item 2. And again, if I have background in organizational change management and working with executives, this may be old hat to me. But if you haven't done that before and you don't have anybody on your team who has, this is really helpful. What do my business owners need to understand in our messaging differently than our executive leadership? And that applies to others, right? We're financial services. We have risk and compliance and legal. We want to make sure that we're able to articulate to them with specificity how our adaptive governance model maintains those regulatory guardrails. As somebody who's had to do that manually before in financial and insurance industry contexts, it's nice to have this already identified and to help me with that messaging. So even if you've done this before, it'll save you time. But if you've never done this before, it's going to be a really good start. Some further examples that it provided, again, in response to that very long prompt, I got a very long response. It's suggested some, stakeholder touch points. So it's provided a cadence that I can, and maybe this is great, maybe it's something different, whatever that is. What am I doing? What are the activities? What's the purpose, etc. And I think this is, again, great. I always modify some of what I get out of the tools, but this is a wonderful starting point. And then talking about how to use generative AI, even beyond its response here, it's telling us in the future, these are some areas where generative AI might be helpful. And that's good to know. Interview summaries, I mean, that's great. And there's tools like Otter.ai and others, Copilot summarizes them. But however you do it, that's good to be reminded that we're going to do a lot of empathy interviews. We can use these tools to summarize and identify sort of patterns of need. Or do a composite of the empathy interviews to sort of understand in aggregate based on a persona where there's struggles. I won't go through all of the other items that are here, but you can see them. And I think we will also share this PDF once we're done completely with some specific ideas. But these are different areas where you can use the tools, and then some other ideas about stakeholder expectations. So it didn't just tell me how to get started. I got a really comprehensive response in all of the different elements about a thoughtful way, a thoughtful ongoing effort to interact with my stakeholders to roll out the VMO. And we all know that that is critical. And if it's not done well at the beginning, it's a foundation that you can't build anything on top of. If we don't have collaboration with our stakeholders and our sponsors in an effective way, our VMO is doomed. So incredibly helpful. Again, just with one really long prompt, but this was all in response to one really long prompt, but it was one prompt. The next in the first 30 days is how do we start defining vision and objectives? So In this context, I've provided you're an agile transformation consultant based on the following organizational goals: reducing time to market, improving overall quality of our legacy product line, help me draft a vision statement and OKRs for the VMO, include measurable outcomes such as reducing lead time by 25% and decreasing escaped level 1 or 2 SEV defects by 20% in fiscal year 25. This one I actually wrote myself, but that is the type of prompt, whether you have generative AI help you with your prompts or you write it yourself. Look at the details in there, quantitative and qualitative. I provide context, legacy, product line, and what my goals are. I'm being more specific. I'm going to get more specific responses. So you can use this as a great way to get started, to get you a draft vision statement. You can use generative AI to facilitate workshops. So maybe you do this as a starting point and let people respond to it. You can use it to help facilitate workshops once you have this, to talk about OKRs or specific goals, if nothing else. And then a subsequent session on setting OKRs once you've established your objectives. It provided to me back, and I talk about OKRs professionally, and I was impressed by this. I think it's a really good, this is one of the wonderful uses of the tool, I think, to give you a lot of good ideas on what solid OKRs are, because sometimes they can be really difficult for folks to craft, especially if you've been working in a legacy PMO construct where we measure things differently. So based on what I had provided in that prompt, you can see that it turned those objectives into my first O's, O1 and O2. And from each of those, use some of the data that I provided. Now, I didn't put in specifics in terms of what those X's and Y's should be. So again, this is where I don't want the tool to do all of that work for me. I would want to look at a baseline in the real world. So again, humans are actively involved in this. But I would look at, for example, key result 1, key result 2. What should those be? And for me, if I was doing this with my team and my stakeholders, we would talk about this. Yes, do we agree that this is a key result? And if so, what is a reasonable goal to be set? I don't want the tool, at least for me, some of you may want to do it differently. I don't want the tool to set those numbers for me, but I do want it to give me some ideas on what might be reasonable. If I've got a ton of baseline data, I might be more comfortable for it to suggest some metric improvements. But for me right now, I would use this, and then I would have a conversation about what we see. And so you can see how it suggested those cascading key results for objective 1. And then the same idea for key result 2, looking at the product quality and critical defects. It added a couple of things that I didn't have in there. Again, it had some numbers that it's suggesting. I would review all of those. But at first blush, prima facie, I like what it has provided to me. And I spend a lot of time talking about OKRs. And so that's, I'm quite happy with at least the initial suggestions. And then in response to that, it provided some additional context that can be helpful, especially if this is something that you haven't done a whole lot of as far as OKRs and setting them, defining them. It provides some additional context and also it confirms that it aligns with our guidance from PMO to VMO, what we specifically practice and preach as part of the Value Management Office. The way that we define what that is and the way of rolling one out, all of this aligns specifically, and it's confirming that all of this aligns with our processes and practices. So we are indeed implementing based on those. I don't believe in the term best practices, but I will say better practices in those standards. So that's how we can help with vision and objectives. Initiating value stream mapping. And this is, for a lot of organizations, this is another area where I see there are a lot of challenges. It's just difficult for a lot of folks to get started. In this example, in my prompt, again, act as a lean consultant. So I'm changing my role, by the way. I didn't say that explicitly. In each of these prompts, even though each of these are all related to rolling out a VMO, when I talk about the persona, the role that I want the system to emulate, they're different roles each time based on the context of that particular question or need. In this case, value stream mapping. It makes more sense to put the persona of a lean consultant. Help me create a current state value stream map for the hardware deployment process. Now, in this particular example, I didn't have enough representative data, but this is where we would provide either via pasted information, attach a CSV, whatever format you've got. Make sure that there's no confidential data in there, by the way. But once you've had that set, you can actually push that data through and it will do the analysis for you, and it will create a current value stream map. Now it's going to do it in a textual way, but it will talk about it and not only generate the value stream map, but really look at where we've got some bottlenecks. So sorry, I'm getting some stuff in the chat. We'll see if we've got time for it. As far as whichever value streams, I think I would probably start with operational, but that may be outside the scope of this particular conversation. Provide detailed context and data for the best results. So I think, again, if we want to start with some of the teams that we've got and really understanding where they are today, this would be a good place to start. Where you can, and I often use Jira data as exports, but whatever tool you've got, if you can get it in CSV or tabular format, or other textual format that can be read in, I know CSV is easy to read, the transactional data will be invaluable, especially for things like this, where we're trying to really understand where we have bottlenecks. When you've got that data, it will suggest recommended optimizations. And the more data and context detail, as with all of these, the more tailored and targeted and useful the responses are going to be. So in this particular example, based on the data there, it does some calculations. Now this is some simulated data, but still you'll get something like this back in your response. And assuming that you've got a reasonable sample size, and that's, I would say 50 or more records there should be fine for most cases. It will provide this data for you. It'll show you the information in terms of the process step, how long it's taking, etc., and then help you generate. Again, it's doing this in plain text, as you can see over on the right-hand side, but it will show you how to actually build that visual map. And then you can use that as a starting point to really understanding where you've got some challenges or issues. The last question that we had was selecting an appropriate tool. And I think, let me go back to the chat because I think there was a question about tooling. Oh, what tools do you recommend that have produced superior results? Karen, if you could throw in the chat, are you talking about the generative AI tool or tools for helping roll out the VMO and really managing at the portfolio and product level?
The second one.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so that's actually this one. So thank you for the question. So you can use the, again, different persona here. So here you're an IT procurement advisor. Given the need to track portfolio progress and manage value streams. Now, in this particular instance, I didn't specify the specific industry or team size. I could, and when you do this, and Karen, if you've got a tool in front of you, you could do this real time and see what you get. That would be interesting to hear. If not, you can do it after the fact, or I can do it and send you the results. But in this one, I did not provide industry or team size, but asked it to recommend tools, compare features like integration capabilities, reporting dashboard, and scalability. Provide examples of how these tools can be configured to support lean portfolio management, because that's really what we're talking about. So you can see it defaulted to mid to large IT organizations with complex value streams and using LPM. It suggested Jira, Align, and ADO. Now, what I don't know, and something that is worthy of experiment again, is I included Jira and ADO in the prompt. I don't know, and again, because these systems are black boxes, that's part of the challenge, is we don't necessarily know what defined their response and how heavily weighted that being in the prompt was, versus the fact that those, at least from my experience, are the two biggest programs. I mean, there's AHA and there's some other tools that can do some of the work from a product management perspective, but I don't know how it got to that answer. And again, that's always one of the things that you have to be aware of with using these tools is we don't know, it's not always reproducible. We don't always know how it got to that conclusion, but this is a good place to start. So provide your detailed context here, more detail than you see there where appropriate, especially if you are in a specific industry, or you've got a very large or very small team. Whatever else is specific, I also added in my example here, tech stack. So in a lot of cases, if you've got a heavy investment, sorry, some more notes in the chat. I'll get back to those if I can. Add additional information there. Tech stack is one that I added. So for me, the reality, and this could be part of context, but it's at least context for all of you if you've not gone through this before. Even if, for example, ADO is a better tool in many organizations, if you're an Atlassian shop, the likelihood of moving towards another tool is challenging. Also, if you're a Microsoft shop and you have a discount for licensing for ADO, or you're already using it for other things, there may not be a desire to move to Jira. So that may be a moot point, but at least in terms of doing the analysis, if you don't have some of those specific obstacles, or include them in your prompt if you want to see about having it help you make an argument on why we should, even though we have an embedded tool in place, move to another one, that it could help with that context as well. Again, it really depends on your specific context. But once it is in place, once you've chosen a tool, Gen AI can help also with automating initial configurations like dashboards and workflows. So as part of that prior response, and again, all of these came back in a single, just very long stream response. I'm just screen capping them and cutting them up so that I can get them on screen to share with all of you. But it provided this information with a feature comparison between those tools. If I had included others, or if it had included others, obviously we'd have a broader table with more columns. But that said, it hit the right notes. It didn't just give me a generic Jira Align versus ADO. Based on the context of what I'm trying to do with launching a VMO, if you look at things like the fact that it goes into detail in that fourth row about LPM, and that it's got in Align an out-of-the-box LPM solution, and that ADO, for example, supports some scaled agile practices, but there's some other challenging items. I don't know what's in the remainder of that. Let's see if it's here. No, not on there. But in its response, it also included some of the, sort of, I would say negative, or at least sort of challenging things as far as ADO for what we need to do in our VMO, which is to have LPM support. So this is really helpful for me. Maybe we're a Microsoft shop and I like ADO, but if it's going to be difficult for me to do LPM with ADO, then that would be something that I could say as part of the tool choice. This is one of the reasons that, my business case for that tool choice may be moving towards Jira anyway. It follows up after that table, though, specifically with some more detail that could be useful for you, either for your own knowledge, for your team's knowledge, but also, as a procurement advisor or anybody who's trying to buy a new tool or invest in a new tool for an organization, you're going to need to have a business case rationalizing that, because these tools are generally not inexpensive. So being able to talk with specificity about how these tools support what the VMO needs. They're not just generic feature sets. They are specific requirements that we would have for the VMO. And so it supports them natively, and that's good for us to know. And then as far as the example use case, it provides one. I didn't ask for the example use case, but it doesn't bother me that there's one there. That might be useful for you. Wasn't super helpful for me, but I know some people like to have those real world scenarios, or theoretical real world scenarios. If it's useful for you, great. For me, it wasn't, but it did provide that without me asking for it.